Is the microphone working? Can you hear me, guys? Now? I don't know how to, how to switch it on.
Yeah. No, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. You hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for coming and joining this session. I would like first of all to express my sincere gratitude to the organizers of this event and Nino Cherchanidze personally for having given me this wonderful opportunity to share the findings of my latest research. And as you can judge by the title of my present discussion, it concerns the Kartvelian substrate of English grammar, something that you most probably have never heard. And I will be concentrating on noun morphology. However, noun morphology is a vast area of study, and in the course of my presentation, I will narrow it down to some of the concrete items, and we'll be discussing only, only just a few problems. Even though there are, the entire noun morphology is basically already finished, and I hope that it will be published in the second volume of my History of the English Language. The first volume has already come up. So, before I start the analysis, I would like to give you such a general statement. My studies in prehistoric linguistics, comparative prehistoric linguistics, and mythology as well, which includes Kartvelian languages, Near Eastern studies, and now the Indo-European studies as well, gives me the right to say that Kartvelian languages and culture have to be included into prehistoric studies, not only of the Near East, but also in Indo-European studies. More narrowly in Germanic studies, and still in a narrower way in English and Kartvelian comparative linguistic and cultural research. Now, there are several I wouldn't say rather assumptions, but there are several conclusions that come from different research areas, and one of them is genetics, and the other one is linguistics. Now, from the genetic point of view, basically I rely and I stem out from the latest works of Stephen Oppenheimer, and I think most probably you have heard of him, and Brian Sykes. These are the geneticists from Oxford University, and they have, and their work, for example, Stephen Oppenheimer's work, The Blood of the Isles, has become one of the groundbreaking works in this particular area. The second one, as I have already mentioned, is linguistics, but basically the two sections of linguistics. The first one is Indo-European studies, and the second one is the theory of the genetic relations between the Kartvelian and the Basque languages. Now, all these three can be broken down into smaller kind of factors, and I have jotted down here only 6, but there are many more. But these 6 items will help you to visualize how Kartvelian languages can be linked with the civilization of the British Isles, as well as with the English language. Now, the first one is the Caucasian and Transcaucasian origin of the founding haplotypes or founding gene groups in the British Isles. These are HV, you see it, these are HV, called also Helena Vera, which was born in Transcaucasia, actually on the territory of present Georgia. Then the second one and the third one, the other two, are male genes, R1b, which is also called Ruisko, and the third one is I, which is called also Ivan in Stephen Oppenheimer's work. These haplotypes, born in Caucasus and Transcaucasus, migrated to the territory of the British Isles. Now, at that time, I'm talking about the Upper Paleolithic period. The British Isles were not a unity of islands, but it was actually, or these islands actually belonged to Europe. they had not been separated by the English Channel. So I will be reducing the term, the British Isles, but please bear in mind that I will be basically talking about that inseparable part of Northern Europe. Now, Stephen Oppenheimer and Brian Sykes come to the conclusion based on the analysis of thousands of samples that the origin of the present-day British population, or Britain's population, is of Basque origin. Now, Brian Sykes goes to the Neolithic period, that is about 6,000 years BC. However, Stephen Oppenheimer goes even much deeper. He goes to the Upper Paleolithic period and before the last glacial maximum, that is the last ice age. So if these haplotypes moved from Transcaucasia, to the British Isles via Europe, then understandably they carried their own languages with them. Now, today, among geneticists and linguists, there is very extensive research being carried out, as well as debate whether genes carry the language with them. Now, for me, for example, this is a very simple question to be answered, because languages and genes cannot just travel separately. I mean, they are just together, in one entity, so to say. Therefore, for me, those haplotypes which were born in Caucasus, Transcaucasus, and those who were the founding haplotypes in the British Isles, of course, carried the Kartvelian languages from Caucasia and Transcaucasia. Now, one of the factors here is that we have to remember that the Kartvelian people, the Georgian people, are the autochthonic population of this area. So there's no question that whether there was any substitution or there was any substrate here. Now, so the second question for me, whether the languages are carried together with the genes, are positive. Now, in this context, I would like to draw your attention now to a third issue that comes into the entire area, and this is the Indo-European origin of the languages which are spoken in the British Isles. On the one hand, we have the Celtic languages, and on the other, Germanic, which is the English language. So what happens in this case? And now I have to give you some of the latest research data from Indo-European studies. Many of these scholars today believe that the traditional understanding of Indo-European languages going back to about 5 or 4 millennia BC has become much older. Actually, it goes down to the very first farmers, according to Colin Redfield, who I suppose you know is one of the greatest archaeologists. And they actually moved the Indo-European languages, moved together with the first farmers from the Near East. Near East, again, is the area where which includes Georgia as well. Now, they came to the British Isles, I mean the Indo-European languages, via Europe. And the date which they said is the beginning of the Neolithic, and now even the Mesolithic. And if we go to the Mesolithic, that means that this is about 9,000 or 10,000 years ago. So there arises another issue, which was the language which preceded the Indo-European, because scholars agree that in the British Isles, the first language was not the Indo-European language. And they come to the conclusion that the first language was something like Basque. Now, this is extremely interesting because the first autochthonic language which arrived in the British Isles was something like the Basque language. And in this context, we have to remember that the Kartvelian and the Basque languages have been connected genetically for a very long time. You basically know that it has been almost 150 years that scholars have been tackling this problem. And I'm happy to say that about 10 years, 15 years ago, the Basque language was already included into the Kartvelian languages. And if you take, for example, the late Mikhail Kurdian's book, Basics of Ibero-Caucasian Linguistics, Chapter 3. You will see the entire problem tackled there, all the levels discussed in comparison, and as the final conclusion, he includes the Basque language as the first branch of the Kartvelian languages. That is, according to mainstream Kartvelology, we know that we have Common Kartvelian, and then it diverged, and the first offshoot was the Swan language, and then Zan and the Megrelian and the last language, and the Kartvelian or the Georgian language, Common Kartvelian, remained the way we have Georgian today, for example. But today, the first offshoot is the Basque language. Now, all these factors that I have mentioned in themselves represent huge areas of study, but I have given you only kind of the basic conclusions. There are very many problems that are connected even with these issues, but I will be very happy to talk about any of these issues during the break. So what I would like to say at this point is that on the one hand, we have Transcaucasian haplotypes going to the British Isles, carrying their Kartvelian languages together with them. We know that the first language was the non-Indo-European Basque-like language, and then came the Indo-European languages. And we have the relationship, genetic relationship of the Basque and Kartvelian languages and people. So this particular relationship goes as deep as Upper Paleolithic, and this is not a very simple thing actually to say, to investigate, and it of course needs much more examination. Now, according to the data that Stephen Oppenheimer gives about this first language which came to the British Isles, actually could count about 16,000 years. Now, before the Roman invasion of the British Isles. Now, 16,000 years is a very long time for one language to be present in such a small area as the British Isles and not leave any traces. And if there are any traces, understandably, they should be present in the English language. Now, I have published a couple of articles on the similarities on the lexical level and the etymology of some of the words, but now we know all that genetic relationships are basically based, not basically, but are very much stronger if the grammatical material is analyzed. And today I'm going to present exactly grammatical material and one of the sections of noun morphology. And in noun morphology, I'm going to talk only about the declension of nouns in Old English. Now, you all very well know that English in its oldest stage was a synthetic language and expressed the relationships between words with the help of affixes. Now, through linguistic quakes and aftershocks, it actually transferred into a completely different typological language, which is the analytical language. But we also very well know that the ancestor languages of the English language, which are the Germanic languages and even the Indo-European languages, they were much more complex. However, what we see from the data of Old English materials, we can say that and not me, but I mean all the scholars say that the English language went through the process of simplification. Entire morphology was simplified. There is a different view, for example, on the verb, but this is a different issue. I'm not going to touch upon this one. So I'm basically concerned with noun morphology in this case, and you all very well know that from the Indo-European 8 cases, today we have got only 2 cases in modern English. And one of the interesting points that has to be underscored here is that among Indo-European languages, Teutonic languages, or the same as Germanic languages, are outstanding due to the processes of simplification. And the English here in this case is just at the very top of the mountain. So. In that case, we can consider that the process of simplification, or moving from more complex to more simple, is the inner characteristic feature of the language mechanism of English. Now, how many grammatical categories did the Old English noun have? Only 3 grammatical categories: gender, number, and declension. Now, as far as declension declension is concerned, it was tightly connected with the three-member structure of an Old English word. We have the root, we have the stem-building suffix, and we also have the case annexes. However, it was the most volatile, so to say, the element of this particular structure was the stem-building suffix, because it was the stem-building suffix that was squeezed in between the root and the grammatical annexes and underwent all kinds of changes, loss, merger, all kinds of assimilative changes and so on. And basically what we witness in the manuscripts of the Old English time, we cannot isolate, we cannot identify the stem-building suffixes in Old English any longer. Some scholars go as far as to say that there are absolutely no traces left in Old English manuscripts as far as the stem-building elements are concerned. Now, the terms connected with this particular phenomena, like we speak about Old English E-stems, O-stems, U-stems, and so on, are simply historically significant, which means that they give us the division of nouns only in pre-Old English period and not in the Old English period. But is it really impossible to retrieve stem-building suffixes based on the material at hand? My answer is positive. We can, and there is ample material which shows that the stem-building suffixes recognized by mainstream linguistics are still there. How? How? We have to go through a four-stage process of analysis and discuss each of the items in succession. Number one, I will characterize the declension in Old English very, very briefly. The second one is stem-building formatives proper, and understandably the first and the second items are very much connected. Then I will talk about the recovery of the stem-building elements based on the nominative case forms, and then the origin of the stem-building suffixes. Understandably, I will be using Old English material and Kartvelian material. So the declension of Old English nouns. The declension of Old English nouns was based on four criteria. Number one, it was the gender, then it was the length of the stem, the final stem syllable, then the phonetic changes in the final syllable of the word, and the last one, no, actually this was the first one, but I placed in the last one, which is the stem-building suffix, because I want to go on to the stem-building suffixes now. Well, as far as the cases are concerned, there were four cases: nominative, genitive, accusative, dative, accusative, and also instrumental. However, the instrumental case was found in the pronominal system of Old English, which once again proves that the previous system was much more complex. And now here we have the stem-building suffixes of Old English. You all very well know, most probably, that in Old English the noun declension was subdivided into two areas. On the one hand, we speak of strong or vocalic declension, and on the other, weak declension or consonantal declension. Now, in vocalic stems, we find A stems, long O stems, U, E, and S stems. In weak consonantal declensions, we find the so-called root stem declension, N declension, and D declension, and R and S declensions. Now, if you pay, I'm not going to speak about the weak declension because this is a huge problem, and this is an entire chapter in my future book. But I will be concentrating on the strong declension only, and even here only on some specific areas. Okay. So most probably you have noticed that one of the items here, one of the stem-building suffixes, is marked in red, which means that it is kind of singled out. Why is it singled out? It is singled out because of its very unusual behavior, linguistic behavior. Sometimes, sometimes it appears in one of the cases, sometimes it just disappears, sometimes it appears together with a different vowel, sometimes it uses completely different paradigms, and so on and so forth. So therefore, Mitchell and Robinson, for example, call this E stem vowel notoriously ambiguous air. So this notoriously ambiguous air is recognized by some of these scholars who studied the history of the English language as a stem building suffix, but some of these scholars simply ignore it. For example, I have some the textbooks of Russian linguists where they simply do not even mention the S-stem nouns as, for example, as a kind of declension. Now, just a very brief characteristic of the groups of stems, I mean A, O, U, and E stems, because they are very important for our further discussion. A-stem nouns, like the long O-stem nouns and N-stem nouns, were the largest in Old English. They actually covered 1/3 of the entire vocabulary. A-stem nouns belonged or incorporated masculine and neuter gender, and they had short and long syllables in the stem, and they had two variants, ya and wa stems. Now, O stems, which incorporated only feminine gender nouns, had also two subdivisions like yo and wa stems. When we come to the O stems, this was one of the smallest groups among the declensional groups in Old English, and then we have the E stem, where we find masculine, feminine, and neuter, that is all genders, and one of the characteristic features of this group was that some of the nouns in this group were declined like O stems, and some of the nouns were declined like A stems. And these nouns later on left this E group, and some went to the A, and some went to the O stem declensions. Now, what do we have in Georgian? In Georgian, we have a completely identical system of declension. And the Georgian audience here will immediately recognize the vowels that are here in this slide. In noun morphology, in Georgian, we also have the subdivision of nouns into two groups. On the one hand, we have vocalic stems, and on the other, consonantal stems, exactly the same as we have in Old English. Now, in vocalic stems, we have A stems, O stems, U stems, and S stems. Exactly the same vowels that are found or that are mentioned in mainstream linguistics. However, we do not have the E stems here, but we do have E in our noun morphology, but this E is a nominative case ending. And interestingly enough, this nominative case ending has to be elided in order to see the consonantal stem of the word. Let me give you just a few examples, most probably for our foreign guests, and not for the Georgian people, because they very well know all these examples. For instance, if I take the word tabi, okay, which means the head, and it ends in E, but it is not an E stem noun. This E is a nominative case ending, and if I take this E away, then I have tav, which means that it is a consonantal stem noun, okay? And the consonant here is V. If I take, for example, pehi, okay, E again is the nominative case ending, and the consonant here is H, so it is also a consonantal stem noun. Differently put, we have, these are simply examples now. Differently put, we have exactly identical stems, or rather vowels, in Old English and in Georgian. Now, in Georgian, the vowel stems are further subdivided into A, which is not found in Old English, and O groups. Now, these groups are very interesting because A groups are called kvetsadi, which means that they usually lose the vowel in certain cases, and we will have an opportunity to discuss them in a more detailed way. And UO nouns are ukvetseli, which means that they preserve their final vowel. Now, if we put the mainstream, if we put the stem suffixes of Old English given by mainstream linguistics and our Old Georgian, or even the modern Georgian as well, because you know that the Georgian grammar has not changed for the last 1500 years. So we will have the following scale, which is a table, which is given in this slide. So we have A. They are phonetically identical, that is materially identical and functionally identical. They are both stem building suffixes. U, absolutely identical both ways. Then we have O. Here the difference is only in the quantity and not the quality. And we have A, which is absolutely identical in both ways, and then we have EE. If we assign some of the percentages to these items, then we will, because there are 5 pairs, we will have 20 for each pair. Therefore, if the functional and phonetic coincidence is present, in that case we give them 20%. So, AA 20, UU 20, or due to the quantitative difference in the vowel length 15, then AA 20 and EE only 10 because there is functional difference. Now, 85% of the coincidence of such grammatical items which actually regulate the mechanism of the language can in no way be borrowed or coincidental. There is something much, much deeper hidden behind these figures. And what is hidden behind these figures is their genetic relationship. How can we prove this? Now let us see. We have come basically to step 3, where we have to take up concrete declensional systems in Old English, and let me tell you that there are about 25 subtypes of declension in Old English, and we have only 10 distinct markers. That means that Old English exercised huge homonymy. And just to give you an example of the dative plural, for example, which is present in the entire declensional system. Also the genitive singular suffix es, which we have even today in present-day English as the possessive es, as you know, together. Apostrophe was added later. And here is the example of the declension of Old English nouns, and you have here just one sample from each subgroup, and as you see, marked in red, the stem building, not the stem building suffixes, but the final vowels, let us put it so, final vowels which function on the ground are E, U, A, and as you see in the first one, can you see this one? Is it? Oh, here, okay? Or no ending, which we call the zero ending. This is very important, and as you see, I have not taken up any other cases. Why not? Because the nominative case is the initial case, and usually nouns have to be present in the nominative case in the form that they were present in the language. Therefore, if the stem building suffixes are still present in the Old English language, then we have to see them in the nominative case. Because in other cases we have the endings of different cases, and it is difficult to single out the endings and the stem building suffixes in the word. So, if we take up the 25 subtypes of the declension in Old English, then we get the table which is here in this slide. And if you pay attention, you will see that we have absolutely all the vowels A, O, U, and E, which were named by mainstream linguistics and which are present in Kartvelian languages as well. I ask you to pay attention to the highlighted items as well, in yellow and in gray. I don't know whether you can see the gray one well. AA, for example. This, I will talk about that. This is a very important factor, and I will talk about it a little bit later. However, when I did the counts, the following results were obtained. The this notoriously ambiguous occurs or produces the highest number of occurrences, and in 13 cases it was present. Now, in the nominative case, of course, singular or plural. Now, the U element was present in 12 cases, A 8 and O 7, but there were no instances where we had E, which is the stem building suffix offered by mainstream linguistics. One more difference which we observe here, that is on the ground, in the material itself, in the functioning language, is that we do not have long O. We have simply short O. And in a little while, I will come back to this issue. So what do we get? What we get is this diagram. So on the one hand, we have Georgian declension, we have Old English declension in function, in the functioning language, and also traditionally supposed stem building suffixes in Old English. Now, the actually functioning elements are absolutely identical with the Georgian stem building suffixes, and you see that from this slide as well. However, the difference with the traditional one is again the E one. Here you have the capital E, it should be small, but anyway, so the E one, which I'm not going to discuss as I have already mentioned, and long O. Why long O? Now, the answer to this question, the question could be put in a different way. Was it a mistake that, for example, Old English nouns were grouped as long O nouns, or and why do we have O, simple O in Old English, in the material? Then the answer can be found in the development of English vowels. The thing is that in the earliest Old English texts, we do not have the distinction between long and short vowels. So it's very difficult to say whether it is long O or short O, or any other long vowel, it does not matter. Long E, short E, for example, long A, short A. You cannot differentiate between the length of the vowel. Now, the second one also is that, I have lost my thread, just a second please. Yes, the second one is that the functioning elements coincide with the Georgian system where they are functioning stem building suffixes. And A, E, O, and U in Old English also occupy the word final position. This is the position of the stem building suffix. Now, this is extremely important that stem building suffixes in Old English and in Georgian function and are presented in the same phonetic way. Now, we come to stage 4, the origin of the English stem building suffixes. Yes, we can say the material side of the stem building suffixes in Georgian and in Old English are identical. Their functions are identical, but some scholars will say this is not enough. We need more proof. And another piece of proof comes from the replacement or interchangeability of some of the vowels in Old English. I suppose you remember I told you please pay attention to some of the vowels, that were given in pairs. It's exactly this. Let us recall that in Old Georgian and present Georgian, we have two subgroups of vocalic stems: A stems and O stems. That is, A stems that lost their stem building suffix, and O stems which preserved their stem building suffix. And now let us have a look at the Old English vowels in the final position. O and U replace each other. They are interchangeable. And the number of this interchangeability amounts to 6. And A and E, which lose the vowels in the Georgian language, amounts to 5, the interchangeability. Differently put, the archetypical or the earlier features of the stem building vowels, that they were somehow united, somehow presented kind of subgroups, is still present in the Old English language. Therefore, this particular replacement of the vowels, of the stem building vowels, the functioning stem building vowels in Old English, is a very, very serious proof of their genetic relations. But we can go still further. These are examples. I'm not going to talk on these examples. This is very easy. Now, but what about this notoriously ambiguous air? If we can account or explain some of the peculiarities of this air in Old English, then most probably we will have very serious evidence for stating that the Old English language genetically actually stemmed out from the Kartvelian. And now I'm going to present the table. So So in this table, you see the declension of the Georgian word mepe, which was declined in the same way for 1,500 years, 1,500 years ago. And the word Old English word stede, which means place. Now, please have a look at the Georgian one. I have provided only the singular number, and you see that mepe, 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 m, so the vowel is preserved. Mepe, vowel is preserved, mepes, okay? In the genitive and instrumental, we have mep, is. So what we have here is the loss of the vowel. Now, instrumental, mep, it. Mep, it, a, and mep, is, a. These are simply extended forms, okay? So what we have here, in two cases, we have the loss of the vowel, and then in the adverbial and vocative, the vowel is restored. It is very interesting to mention that in Old Georgian, the stem nouns formed their plural either with air or with the loss of air. That is, in the Old English, I could say mepebi. Now the Georgians will understand how so mep, eb, e, the loss of the vowel, and mepe, eb, e, where the vowel is preserved. Therefore, I have not given you the plural declension. Okay, now let us go to the Old English stuff. Now, in the nominative, in the nominative we have a preserved. In the dative we have a preserved, like the Georgian declension. Look at the genitive singular. Genitive singular, es is added, and what happens to the vowel e? It disappears exactly in the same manner as in the Georgian mepe. However, we do not have the instrument. We do not have the instrumental case in Old English. What we have, though, is the plural form where we have stedes, okay, vowel preserved, like the Georgian variant. Stedes, also the vowel is preserved, but what happens in the dative and in the genitive, we again observe the loss of the vowel. Now, one might say that, well, you know, this is just great because we have two cases and 50% of the instances coincide, because the genitive case, singular and plural, exactly coincide. We have the loss of the vowel. But if we remember that the instrumental case in Old English converged with the dative case, and understandably the nouns in the instrumental case carried their peculiarities over to the dative case, then it is very easily explained why we have in one case, in the dative case, the loss of the vowel. Actually, according to the archetypical formula, we should not have the absence of the vowel instead of here. But this is the consensus between, linguistic consensus between the grammatical elites, which, by the way, in the English language happen very often. So what we come to is that basically we have 100% coincidence in the declensional system of a group. That is, in Old English, we can assuredly say that in Old English, nouns ending in a, yes, they did lose the vowel, they did lose the stem building a, but these peculiarities were brought over from their previous system, from the archetypical system. Now, of course, I could carry on, you know, with many other similarities that we have, but as you see, my PowerPoint has already come to the end, so to say, because I did not intend to give you more, just because of the very complexity of the matter itself. Here, for example, I haven't discussed the the stems, for example, the declension ones, which do not lose the vowels, and we have the same in Old English, for instance. But that's a different matter, most probably for some other time. But what kind of conclusions can we make? The Old English noun declension is absolutely identical with the present and Old Georgian noun declension. We have vowel stem nouns and consonant stem nouns. We have exactly the same vowels and acting as stem building elements or stem formatives in the Old English language. and the notoriously ambiguous air, the behavior of this vowel can be explained only through this similar, notorious, so to say, behavior in the original language. Now let us link whatever results we have with the prehistoric picture that I gave you at the beginning of the lecture. So we said that the haplotypes of HB, R1b, and I that were born in Caucasia and Transcaucasia moved over to the British Isles via Central Europe and took their language with them, which existed there for many thousands of years. And that language was a Basque language. Now, the Basque language, as we have already mentioned, is the same Kartvelian language. So whether we replace the Basque-like language with the Kartvelian, there's no problem, because we see that actually the English language, which is dated now, which is now much older, and Indo-European, the languages, as I said, date to the Mesolithic, we have a wonderful picture. Upper Paleolithic Caucasian haplotypes move to the British Isles. They take the language with them in the Upper Paleolithic. Then there comes the Mesolithic time when, for example, the language starts changing, and different alterations take place, and the language loses its archetypical, its original nature. And this process continued for many, many years. And let me remind you, I did not mention it at the beginning, that after the Paleolithic time, when these founding haplotypes moved to the British Isles, we do not actually see any, so to say, full-scale migrations, that is, mass migrations to the British Isles. What we see there is cultural migration. Cultural migration is moving, the movement of small groups of people who bring simply a higher level of culture. But what is interesting is that these people who actually participated, who went from the same area, the Near East, and who participated in this cultural migration, they were ethnically the same. That is, they belonged to the same, as Oppenheimer and Sykes say, to the same Basque origin, and as I have already said, the Basques and the Kartvels are just the same. So thank you very much. I suppose I tried to make it as simple as possible because the problems are quite, complicated. But if there are any questions, they are all welcome. I will be simply happy to answer them all. Thank you. Yes.
This is so, I have reminded a very funny story, may I say?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Which concerns Georgian and Basque relationship and language. So I think you have to remember Kartvelian, maybe Uncle Shvili.
Yes.
Well, we attended a conference in Moscow. Well, it was a long time ago, of course, and she invited at home professors from Spanish professors, and one lady told the story, and she told, when I was in Tbilisi, I lived, my neighbor was a man by name something, Ruben or something like that, and you know what, I understand some Georgian. Because, well, when he came at home and drunk and so, and he called to his son. Well,